What is up, ladies and gentle nerds? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and this is another edition of the Overthinking MTG podcast, the show where we look at a random card, talk about it for a little bit longer than it necessarily makes sense, and go break it down into all kinds of different levels in an unscripted, unedited fashion. So thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. If you enjoy this show or this podcast and you're over on the YouTube feed, don't forget to click the like button and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It makes a huge difference, and I really appreciate it. And if you're listening to this on the podcast feed, which, by the way, this is available as a podcast if you're on YouTube. And wait a minute, if you're listening to the podcast, it is available on YouTube. If you're listening as a podcast, please go ahead and give it 5 stars and give it a review. It means the world. All right, shilling aside, let's get into our card for the day. Let's press that random card button and let's see what we get. All right, today we are looking at Demon's Grasp. This was from, it looks like this particular version that we're looking at was printed in a dual deck, which is Nissa versus Ob Nixilis, which is pretty appropriate because we can see Ob Nixilis, actually the demon planeswalker, appearing quite a bit in the theme. Although, interestingly enough, on the artwork itself, we only see his arm and his shadow, which is pretty darn ominous. The main focal point is actually the face of a core warrior who he is currently choking out with just one hand, which is pretty darn brutal, not gonna lie. So this card, it is a sorcery for 4 and a black. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. And then it has some flavor text. Take what solace you can in the knowledge that you will not be here to witness Zendikaar's demise. And that is attributed to Ob Nixilis himself. Now, I find it appropriate that this card has so many little homages to Ob Nixilis. The fact that he's so prevalent in the artwork as well as the theme, because this card reminds me a lot of a card that was actually printed in War of the Spark called Ob Nixilis's Cruelty, which is kind of a revamped, dare I say, corrected version of this, which is it is also a card that gives a target creature -5/-5 until end of turn, but it also exiles that creature if they would die, and it only costs 3 instead of 5. And it's at instant speed. If you ask me, Ob Nixilis' Cruelty here is a criminally underrated piece of removal that has been available in Standard recently, and up until the most recent rotation as of this recording. I feel like Ob Nixilis' Cruelty is a crazy piece of removal that is wildly underrated. Meanwhile, Demon's Grasp, the card that we're actually looking at here today, it's sorcery speed, it's expensive, it's generally not good. This looks to me like a card that in the limited environments where it resided, it may have been a perfectly fine, like, pick 6 or 7. You know, it's the kind of thing that you're pretty jazzed if it wheels, but you're probably not going to pick one this card. I believe this was originally printed in Battle for Zendikar. I could be wrong. It was in the original Zendikar block. Of that, I'm pretty sure, by virtue of the fact that we're looking at a core warrior. And I think Ob Nixilis was present during all that jazz. Well, that, and we're talking about Zendikaar's demise in the flavor text. So I think it's pretty safe to say that we're looking at an older Zendikar block here. Yeah, all in all, I feel like Demon's Grasp is just stinks of draft chaff removal. I have no doubt there are bulk bins in local game stores across the country, if not the world, that have a handful of these lying just ready to be picked up by someone for $0.25 a piece, which is a little bit overpriced if you ask me. I'm just guessing based on bulk bin rates. Anyway. Oh yeah, so Demon's Grasp, there are a million better ways to remove something, although if you're dealing with a creature that is indestructible, a toughness reduction down to 0 or less will kill it, which is something that is very important to note. So there are a lot of Darksteel creatures where Demon's Grasp can kill them, which I think is very noteworthy. So if you have an indestructible creature, like this could straight up kill gods, which I think is worth consideration. And another one of the reasons why I thought Ob Nixilis' Cruelty was underappreciated when it was still around in Standard, because, well, Well, it was around for a minute alongside the Theros gods, and being able to Ob Nixilis' Cruelty a Heliod felt pretty darn good when you could pull it off. So, I mean, when you could pull it off, let's be honest, that almost never happened. But it's a fringe situation in which a -5/-5 hit is meaningful. It is strong. It gets around a lot of different avenues. It's not damage, and it doesn't behave like damage. It's a lot more meaningful than damage. Having a toughness of 0 or less means that as a state-based check, what happens is the board gets checked every so often for state-based events, and those are situations where and pardon me if I sound a little stuffy. I'm fighting a head cold at the moment, and I hope it's just a head cold, but I do apologize if that's coming through on the mic. But where a state-based action occurs is when the board will just check and make sure that everything is how it's supposed to be. And it's one of those events that occurs in the digital client as well as actually on the tabletop board game or the tabletop card game when you're playing it. That's really just an intuitive way for the rules to be concrete. Because the truth of the matter is, if a creature has a toughness of 0 or less, it dies. It just has to. It doesn't make sense for a creature with toughness 0 to be alive. And so as a result, the board will just occasionally check and make sure, okay, is everybody's toughness 1 or higher? And if the answer to that is no, oh, then they die. And it happens faster than instant speed. It happens so fast, 95% of players or 90% of players have no idea what a state-based check is, because it's just a very rules lawyery way of pointing out the intuitive way we play the game. And that's actually one of the things that makes Magic such a fascinating and such a fantastic game, in my opinion, is how detailed and how specific the rules are. There is a black and white answer in Magic for any controversy, for any discrepancy, for any argument. There is a black and white answer because the creators of the game have spent an obscene amount of time and no doubt an obscene amount of energy poring over the rules to make them as specific and detailed as humanly possible. And I think that that's something that's absolutely beautiful. And as a result, Demon's Grasp behaves very differently from a red burn spell that deals 5 damage. It functions very, very differently, as a matter of fact. The other cool thing that you can do with Demon's Grasp that I really appreciate, and other power toughness reducers, is if there's a 6/6 on the board, for example, before combat, in this case it has to be done at instant speed or it has to be done at sorcery speed, unfortunately, which is why changing it to instant speed for Ob Nixilis' Cruelty was just a much better call, in my opinion. But at sorcery speed, in this case, you could take that 6/6 that your opponent is sitting on, turn it into a 1/1 for the turn. And little changes like that can have a significant difference when it comes to combat math. And when it comes time to actually swing at that opponent, turning their big fatty into a little tiny creature can have a significant difference on those outcomes, especially when you've been applying pressure and their life total is relatively low. If they feel like they've stabilized the board, Demon's Grasp can do a really good job of destabilizing the board for a turn. So that's pretty darn cool. It definitely benefits the aggressor more than somebody who's playing defensively. It's not a very good control card, I don't think, but if you're playing in an aggressive deck as a piece of removal or as a quasi-combat trick, I think it's very, very good. The other thing that I want to touch on in this card is the artwork, because it's showing Ob Nixilis' kind of gauntleted hand grasped around a Kor's neck, and the Kor is actually holding up. His arms are perfectly free, so the Kor isn't bound by anything other than this hand around his neck, and he's got one arm up trying to like pry Ob's hand away from his neck, which of course, as you can see, is not really working super great, which is flavorful with the card itself and the Demon's Grasp, after all. But in his right hand, which is in the foreground of the shot, he is actually holding some kind of weapon. It looks like a knife. And we can also see some scratch marks on Ob's arm that are actually erupting in flame, and like they look like cracking cinders, as if there's a flame beneath the skin that is being exposed by these slash marks. And it's not clear if those little slashes, and I don't know enough about the Ob Nixilis character design to know whether or not those are a part of his skin, or if those are wounds that he sustained as this core is trying to free himself. And I kind of want to believe that this core has slashed into Ob Nixilis's arm and exposed this fiery core of the demon. I feel like that's just a really cool, evocative image that we get here. And the truth, and then that makes it all the more impressive that Ob's grasp is unswayed, even though his victim is actively slicing into his flesh, or well, I don't know if demons have flesh necessarily, but his form, he's being actively slashed into, and it's still not enough to stop him. That is powerful stuff, and I like it. So even though the card itself isn't particularly powerful, even though it is this looks like something that's happened, it feels like an older card that hasn't been hit by the power creep that we see today. I mean, we looked at a card that is actually a very similar effect, that is just inarguably better, and it was considered not necessarily unplayable, but it was definitely an unappreciated common in War of the Spark. So we've come a long way from Demon's Grasp being viable. And I actually suspect even when it was first out, it wasn't exactly viable, or it wasn't great, I'm sure. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out, everybody. I appreciate you guys. This has been a load of fun. This has been Demon's Grasp on the Overthinking MTG podcast. I've been Hamhocks42. You can also catch me on Twitch, twitch.tv/Hamhocks42. I appreciate you guys. I will catch you next time. And don't forget, you are a good person, and you deserve to be happy.